No warning came. No battle line was drawn. No enemy was seen. The ocean remained calm. The horizon stayed empty. And yet, ships began to disappear. Steel vanished beneath the waves. Cargo meant to feed cities never arrived. Fuel meant to power factories never reached shore. There were no explosions in the newspapers. No victory speeches on the radio. Only silence. Far below the surface, engines whispered. Men waited. Breathing slowed. Time stretched. A single command ended everything. One torpedo. One impact. One ship gone. Japan never saw the enemy coming. Because the enemy did not come from the sky. It did not come from the shore. It came from below. Night after night, the lifelines were cut. Not with fire. Not with fury. But with patience. This was not a war of noise. It was a war of absence. A war where ships vanished. And a nation slowly began to starve. This was America's Wolfpack. The Pacific War is often remembered for its fire. For its battleships. For its aircraft carriers. For its explosions that shook the sky. But the most decisive weapon was rarely seen. It did not dominate headlines. It did not sail in formation. Japan was an island empire. Every factory depended on ships. Every city depended on supply routes. Oil, food, steel, and ammunition crossed thousands of miles of open ocean. Break those routes, and the war changes. The United States understood this. Not immediately. Not perfectly. But relentlessly. While fleets clashed above the waves, another war unfolded below. A quiet war. A patient war. A war without witnesses. American submarines slipped into Japanese-controlled waters. They did not seek glory. They sought tonnage. Each sinking meant more than a destroyed ship. It meant factories slowing. Planes grounded. Soldiers waiting for supplies that would never come. This was economic warfare at its most brutal. No cities burned. No armies marched. Instead, an entire nation felt hunger, shortage, and collapse. One torpedo at a time. This is the story of that unseen campaign. The submarines. The crews. And the silent strategy that helped break an empire. The ocean was not empty. It only looked that way. Beneath the surface existed a battlefield unlike any other in the war. No front lines. No flags. No clear victories. Only depth. Only pressure. Only silence. Submarine warfare erased everything soldiers understood about combat. There was no charge forward. No retreat in formation. There was only waiting. Hours passed in darkness. Days blurred together. Men learned to measure time by sound. A distant propeller. A sonar ping. The creak of steel under pressure. Down here, the ocean itself was an enemy. One mistake could flood a compartment. One crack could crush a hull. One miscalculation could end everyone aboard. The crews lived sealed inside steel cylinders. Air grew stale. Heat became unbearable. Diesel fumes clung to skin and clothing. Sleep came in fragments. Privacy did not exist. Fear was constant, even in silence. Above them, the war looked different. Ships sailed confidently. Convoys followed routine routes. Ports stayed busy. They did not see what waited below. A submarine did not fight with speed or armor. It fought with invisibility. With patience. With restraint. Commanders studied patterns instead of targets. They counted ships, not enemies. They chose when not to attack as carefully as when to strike. Every patrol was a test of endurance. Weeks at sea. No contact with home. No certainty of survival. And when the moment came, it happened fast. A periscope rose briefly. A solution was calculated. A torpedo was fired. Then silence returned. No cheers followed. No confirmation arrived. Only the knowledge that something above had ceased to exist. This was the invisible battlefield. A war fought without witnesses. And one that Japan would never fully understand. Until its lifelines began to vanish. At the start of the war, America's submarines were not ready. Not in doctrine. Not in confidence. Not in results. Early patrols were cautious. Attacks were isolated. Mistakes were costly. Faulty torpedoes failed. Opportunities slipped away. Crews returned frustrated and empty-handed. But war is a ruthless teacher. And the ocean offered no mercy. Slowly, lessons were learned. Failures were studied. Excuses were removed. American commanders realized something critical. Submarines were not meant to hunt alone. They were meant to hunt together. This idea was not new. The Germans had used it in the Atlantic. But the Pacific demanded its own adaptation. Distances were vast. Targets were scattered. Coordination had to be precise. Thus, the Wolfpack was born. Multiple submarines were assigned to the same hunting grounds. Information was shared. Sightings were reported. Movements were tracked. One submarine would shadow. Another would intercept. A third would wait in silence. Radio messages became weapons. Intelligence became ammunition. Timing became everything. This was no longer random hunting. It was organized starvation. Submarines targeted shipping lanes instead of warships. Tankers instead of battleships. Cargo instead of glory. Each patrol had a purpose. Each attack fit into a larger design. The goal was not dramatic victory. It was cumulative destruction. A ship sunk today meant shortages tomorrow. A convoy destroyed meant factories slowing next month. A tanker lost meant aircraft grounded weeks later. The Wolfpack strategy turned the ocean into a trap. Japanese shipping sailed into patterns it could not escape. And once caught, there was no warning. No alarms. No second chances. By the time Japan realized what was happening, the system was already working. And it would not stop. Because the Wolfpack did not need speed. It needed patience. And time was finally on America's side. Japan was not defeated on its borders. It was weakened along its routes. As an island nation, Japan lived by the sea. Every resource had to cross water. Nothing arrived by land. Oil fueled ships, planes, and factories. Food fed cities and armies. Steel fed the war machine. None of it existed in abundance at home. Tankers sailed from the south. Cargo ships crossed long, exposed distances. Convoys followed predictable paths. At first, these routes felt safe. The ocean seemed endless. The threat invisible. But dependence creates vulnerability. One ship lost was not just one ship gone. It was weeks of fuel erased. Months of production delayed. When a tanker sank, engines went silent. When a cargo ship vanished, shelves emptied. When convoys failed to arrive, plans collapsed. Factories slowed first. Then training suffered. Then frontline units felt the strain. Pilots lacked fuel. Ships stayed in port. Repairs were delayed. Shortages spread quietly. Not with panic. With frustration. Civilians felt it next. Rations shrank. Quality declined. Confidence weakened. The war still raged far away. But its pressure was now inside Japan itself. American submarines understood this perfectly. They did not chase fleets. They chased necessity. They targeted the arteries, not the fists. They cut connections, not just ships. Each torpedo struck more than steel. It struck timing, planning, hope. And the damage could not be repaired quickly. New ships took time. New crews took longer. Japan's industrial rhythm began to falter. Not suddenly. Relentlessly. The Wolfpack did not need to destroy Japan in a single blow. It only needed to keep cutting. Because an island nation without supply does not collapse in fire. It collapses in silence. A submarine was not a ship. It was a sealed world. Once the hatch closed, escape disappeared. There was no fresh air. No sunlight. No horizon. Men lived stacked among machines. Torpedoes shared space with bunks. Engines shared space with bodies. Every surface sweated. Every smell lingered. Nothing ever truly dried. Heat was constant. Especially in the Pacific. Steel trapped it. The ocean pressed it inward. Fresh food vanished within days. Meals became routine. Taste became irrelevant. Sleep came when it could. Not when it was needed. Alarms decided rest. Privacy did not exist. Silence was rare. Darkness was permanent. The most dangerous enemy was not always outside. It was pressure. It was fatigue. It was fear. Depth charges shattered calm without warning. Explosions rolled across the hull. Lights flickered. Men froze. Every sound mattered. A dropped tool could betray position. A wrong movement could end the patrol. Sonar pings echoed like a heartbeat. Each one asked a question. Each one threatened an answer. The hull creaked under pressure. Steel complained. Men listened. There was no running. No fighting back. Only patience. Hours passed at the bottom. Engines silent. Breathing controlled. Crewmen counted seconds. Commanders counted chances. Every patrol tested the mind as much as the body. Weeks without news. Weeks without certainty. Some men broke quietly. Others hardened. Most endured. Because failure meant more than death. It meant sinking alone. Unseen. Unremembered. Yet they stayed. They followed orders. They returned to the depths again and again. Not for medals. Not for recognition. But because someone had to remain underwater. Cutting lifelines. One silent patrol at a time. The moment of attack was brief. The consequences were not. A periscope broke the surface for seconds. Angles were calculated. Distances measured. There was no rush. No emotion. Only precision. Then the torpedoes ran. Sometimes the impact was immediate. Sometimes it took minutes. Sometimes silence followed, heavy and uncertain. When the explosion came, it was final. Steel tore apart. Water rushed in. Lights vanished. Above the surface, chaos erupted. Below it, nothing changed. The submarine did not celebrate. It did not wait. It slipped away. One ship lost did not make headlines. But hundreds did. Merchant fleets began to thin. Convoys arrived incomplete. Some did not arrive at all. Japan's ports grew quieter. Docks stood emptier. Schedules failed. Fuel shortages spread first. Then food. Then raw materials. Factories reduced output. Repair yards waited for parts that never came. Plans adjusted downward again and again. Military units felt it next. Training flights were cut. Naval patrols shortened. Ships remained docked not by strategy, but by necessity. Civilians felt it slowly. Rations shrank. Substitutes replaced essentials. Quality declined. Confidence followed. There were no dramatic announcements. No single moment of collapse. Only accumulation. Each submarine patrol added weight. Each sinking removed options. Each lost tanker erased future movement. The Wolfpack did not need to sink everything. It only needed to sink enough. Enough to disrupt rhythm. Enough to create delay. Enough to make recovery impossible. Japan still fought fiercely. Still defended territory. Still resisted. But behind every effort stood shortage. Behind every plan stood limitation. The war was no longer just about strength. It was about endurance. And endurance depends on supply. America's submarines understood that victory did not require spectacle. It required consistency. A steady pressure. Applied quietly. Relentlessly. By the time the scale of destruction became clear, the damage was already irreversible. The ships were gone. The routes were broken. And the silence beneath the waves had done its work. Japan did not ignore the threat. It simply recognized it too late. At first, losses were dismissed. Ships vanished. Explanations followed. Storms. Accidents. Isolated attacks. But patterns became impossible to deny. Convoys began to sail with escorts. Destroyers were reassigned. Patrols increased. The response came, but it came slowly. Japan lacked specialized anti-submarine doctrine. Training was limited. Technology lagged. Sonar was inconsistent. Depth charges were crude. Coordination was weak. Escorts were too few. And those available were needed elsewhere. The Pacific was vast. Too vast to guard completely. Every ship required protection. Every route demanded coverage. There were never enough hulls to do both. As losses mounted, desperation followed. Convoys grew larger, not safer. Routes became predictable, not secure. Speed replaced caution. American submarines adapted immediately. They studied the escorts. They learned their patterns. Wolfpacks waited where protection thinned. They struck where confidence returned. Even when submarines were detected, escape was possible. Depth favored the hunter. Patience favored survival. Japan attempted innovation. New weapons were rushed. New tactics tested. None arrived fast enough. Industry struggled to replace losses. Shipyards fell behind. Crews became harder to train. Every solution required time. Time Japan no longer had. The war demanded fuel, steel, and food. And the sea no longer delivered. Fighting back required resources. Resources required shipping. Shipping no longer existed in sufficient numbers. Japan was not defeated underwater by a single moment. It was worn down. Slowly. Methodically. Inevitably. By the time countermeasures matured, the arteries were already severed. The Wolfpack had done what it was designed to do. And there was no way to undo it. There were no parades waiting for them. No crowds at the docks. No headlines announcing their return. Submarine crews came home quietly. Often at night. often unnoticed. Their victories were measured in numbers. Not stories. In tonnage. Not faces. Many patrols ended without celebration. Some ended without words at all. There were no witnesses to their battles. No cameras below the waves. No reporters to record the fear. When ships disappeared, the ocean closed behind them. Evidence sank. Silence remained. Families knew little of what had happened. Letters were censored. Details were classified. Men carried memories alone. The sounds. The waiting. The moments when depth charges fell too close. Some crews never returned. There were no graves to visit. Only coordinates on a chart. Submarine warfare offered no dramatic moments of triumph. Only survival. Only completion of the mission. Even within the Navy, recognition came slowly. Other battles were louder. More visible. More cinematic. But while attention followed fire and steel, the Wolfpack continued its work. Day after day. Patrol after patrol. The war they fought did not end with cheers. It ended with absence. Ships that never arrived. Fuel that never reached port. Factories that never restarted. Victory came not from spectacle, but from persistence. And when the war finally ended, many of these men returned to civilian life without explanation. They carried the knowledge quietly that empires can fall without hearing a single explosion. That wars can be won by those who remain unseen. This was the war without fame, but not without consequence. When the war ended, the ocean grew quiet again. But it was no longer the same. The Wolfpack had proven something the world could not ignore. Wars are not only won by force. They are won by denial. Deny fuel. Deny food. Deny movement. Modern warfare changed beneath the waves. Nations studied the campaign carefully. Not the explosions. The results. A powerful fleet meant nothing without supply. An army could not fight without logistics. An empire could not survive without access. Submarine warfare became a cornerstone of naval strategy. Silence became a weapon. Patience became power. Future conflicts would not begin with battles. They would begin with disruption. Shipping lanes became strategic targets. Choke points gained importance. Economics became inseparable from combat. The lessons of the Wolfpack echoed far beyond World War II. They shaped Cold War doctrine. They shaped modern deterrence. Today's submarines are faster, quieter, deadlier. But their purpose remains unchanged. They exist not to be seen, but to be felt. To apply pressure without warning. To shape outcomes without engagement. To decide wars before armies collide. Japan was not defeated by submarines alone. But without them, the war would have lasted longer. Cost more. Destroyed more. The Wolfpack shortened the conflict by removing choice. By removing options. By removing time. In the end, the greatest victories are not always visible. They are measured in what never happened. Battles never fought. Ships never built. Offensives never launched. That is the legacy of America's Wolfpack. A reminder that in war, silence can be louder than fire. And absence can be decisive. Japan did not surrender because the sea was loud. It surrendered because the sea went quiet. The Wolfpack never sought attention. It did not need it. Its victory was measured in absence. In empty docks. In grounded aircraft. In factories waiting for fuel that would never arrive. While cities burned and armies clashed. Another decision was being made far below the surface. One ship at a time. One route at a time. One silent patrol after another. The submarines did not destroy Japan in a single moment. They removed its ability to continue. Without oil, engines stopped. Without food, morale collapsed. Without materials, production failed. What bombs began? The Wolfpack ensured could not be sustained. This was not a story of heroes standing in sunlight. It was a story of men disappearing beneath waves. And returning changed. Some never returned at all. Their war was invisible. But its outcome was permanent. America's Wolfpack proved that modern war is not only about strength. It is about control. About patience. About understanding what truly keeps a nation alive. And when those lifelines are cut, even the strongest empire begins to fade. No warning. No spectacle. No second chance. Just silence. In the end, Japan was not only defeated by fire and steel. It was starved. Quietly. Methodically. And beyond recovery. That is the power of a war fought unseen.